The junk. What did I have to show for my 2 years of dating and nearly 10 years of happily ever after? A ridiculously expensive house, a menial career, a marriage on life support, and a circle of friends who were constantly competing with one another. Our 2 amazing children, David, who is 8.5, and Megan, who turned 7 this month, were the only bright light. I would leave this place right away if it weren't for them, but I would never harm them, at least not yet. Separation. Not a choice. Our house was bought at the top of the market. We made the grave error of believing that if we delayed taking out a mortgage, we would never be able to afford one in the future. We ended up deeply in debt. Although the house is nice, we're not wealthy, as they say. Neither of us could make the payments on our own in the event of a divorce. Because of the children and my desire to not live out of the back seat of my car, I continue to stay in this marriage. My main concern is how long it will last. Though I suppose stress and going in 2 different directions is what happened, it wasn't always this way. Heather wanted the white picket fence house and the fairytale marriage. And me. In any case, my dream was to wed the love of my life and spend our free time exploring the globe. Children have the ability to alter those dreams. While we were organizing our trip to the south of France, Heather became pregnant. How? During one of our weekend getaways, she made the error of forgetting to bring her birth control pills, thinking that since it wasn't her fertile time of the month, she would be fine. Our vacation to France had to be postponed because she had trouble with arithmetic and we had a bun in the oven. She advised us to have another child as soon as possible if we wanted one after David so that they would be close in age and we could finish toilet training and diapers at the same time. We had not anticipated that her second attempt at conception would take longer. Having a child was a lot of joy at first, but eventually it became a just put it in and get it over with situation. After that, we didn't do much traveling, and when we did, we required a travel trailer to store everything we thought we may need. I would tell myself, dreams never really die, they're just put on hold knowing that they will resurface later when things settle down, to cheer myself up while I worked on various boring tasks. Having 2 children didn't make life boring, it just wasn't the kind of thrill I was sometimes craving. 8 years later, we were just your average married couple from the suburbs. Our group of friends consisted largely of people who were attempting to pursue the American dream, while the kids participated in sports and other extracurricular activities. However, my brain woke up and stopped like what it was seeing when we reached 9 years old. We were barely making ends meet. The burden of 2 new car payments and country club dues was getting to them. Our children were constantly in need of something, and our annual pay raises were simply not keeping up. Our lifestyle was much above our means. I worked as a middle manager at a manufacturing facility, while Heather was a secretary and clerk in a legal office. Even though our occupations were low-key and required as much overtime as I could manage, they were sufficient to support our pleasant lifestyle. And myself and Heather. Still, we both cherished the children. Heather was always dressed to the nines, but my typical daytime attire was Dockers and a polo shirt. As Heather explained it, she was meeting the clients of the firm, so she needed to look the part. She wasn't trying cases before the Supreme Court. For crying out loud, she was a law clerk. The saddest thing was that, nearly 10 years into their marriage, the spark had virtually vanished. Our relationship had been severely damaged by our disputes over money and everything else. That was about it. We slept in the same bed and were polite to each other. Now, it was all for our children. Everyone in the neighborhood assumed we were that happy couple when we got together. I kept our relationship a secret from everyone. But I knew that Heather was talking a big game about our home life based on the glances she got from the other wives. Apart from the fact that I didn't want everyone to know our business, not that anything would change, I suppose it didn't really matter. The only positive thing that came out of these get-togethers was that Heather would generally return from them horny and in need of some relief since she had consumed too much alcohol. I had long since ceased referring to it as love-making, since it felt more like a much-needed release. The following day, however, we resumed our role as the stereotypical Ozzie and Harriet pair. It was awful. I was growing bored of asking as we hadn't had bonding in a month. To put it another way, I had had enough of pleading. My needs were not being satisfied in any way. As a man, I would have liked to do it every hour on the hour, but Heather said that would never happen, at least not in her lifetime. She pretended to be weary at first, then she was in the wrong mood, and eventually she blamed the kids. Following our most recent neighborhood gathering, things kind of got out of hand. This month, it happened at our house, and by the time everyone had departed, Heather was pain-free. I finished most of the basic cleanup. The remaining tasks could wait until Sunday morning after breakfast. Although I was eager for some respite, Heather had already taken a shower and settled into bed when I arrived upstairs. I cuddled up and gave her a kiss on the neck, but she didn't react. I heard it as I let my hands wander. She was clearly snoring. It wasn't loud. She was completely out of it. I made a few attempts, but to no success. Reluctantly, I took a shower, applied some hand relief, and went to bed. I was not having fun at camp. She headed down to the kitchen, where I was preparing breakfast for the kids. There was frost in the air, even with one pan full of hot bacon and the other with eggs cooking. Sorry about last night. I remained silent. It wasn't intentional. I just had too much to drink last night. I must have turned it up a notch because my fury activated some silly switch in my brain. The expression on her face was priceless. "You now need to be drunk to have sex with me. Be still, my heart. I don't need your pity fucks." I thought back to the last time I'd grabbed her as she was getting out of the shower and said, "You can keep them because they haven't been worth the wait lately anyway." Comparable to playing with a doll. I had turned it up more than a few notches as I was saying it. At last, she answered, "If you weren't pawing at me all the time, maybe I'd be in the mood more often. Maybe if I got some more than a couple times a year, I wouldn't be pawing at you all the time." I got sick of her pious demeanor and said, "You're just like a dog in heat. All you're looking to do is get yourself off. Don't worry, I won't be bothering you anymore." "Good, it'll be a refreshing change not to have to fend you off every time I walk by you. Heather, why don't you go screw yourself?" I had never spoken to her like that before, so she looked shocked. But on second thoughts, "You're probably doing that anyway." 2 pans were burning on the stove when I turned to go. That evening, she attempted to retract a little, but I remained irate and weary of her constant justifications. We resumed our conversation, at which point she stormed out of the room and I fell asleep. I tried to fall asleep by locking our bedroom door, turning out the light, and so on, but I was unable. Whether we had money or not, I was on the verge of adding our marriage to the rising statistics of divorce. She must have tried the doorknob at around 2 in the morning, but I was not going to allow her into the room. Who knows where she slept in the end? That left the couch in the TV room because there are only 3 bedrooms in the home and they're all occupied. It was ancient and as solid as stone. I got up at 6, showered, put on some clothes, and at last I opened the door to our bedroom. I got the kids up and dressed before going downstairs. "Morning to you too," I murmured as I walked past Heather as she emerged from the den and slashed at me. I made the kids breakfast and had a cup of coffee before I left the house. The new polar ice age began at this time. We didn't speak again after that. We would exchange words, but we never actually conversed. There were no hugs, kisses, or other expressions of affection shared. Her heels were digging in, and she nearly lost it when I told her I wasn't coming to Carol and Tim's BBQ. What am I going to tell them? I didn't back down, and she and the kids crossed the street holding her Jell-O shape. How about the truth? That would be a novel idea, wouldn't it? But I suppose all the wives already know what an uncaring guy I already am. As usual, she returned broken, but this time, she wasn't seeking affection. Everyone asked where you were. I told them you weren't feel well and let it go at that. She wasn't feeling very upbeat or was too inebriated to protest at this point. So she said, "Why didn't you tell them I'm married to a frigid woman and got tired of begging for it?" She showered, changed into her regular t-shirt, and crawled into bed. I drew away as soon as I felt her reach for me. She made no more attempts. We continued living our new life week by week. When I thought it necessary, I gave myself a little hand relief, and I believe Heather used up a box of batteries. On a Friday night, when she went out with a few friends, I was almost relieved to have her gone from the house. However, her expression upon arriving home after midnight indicated to me that we were now dealing with a very serious problem. It was hard for me to admit, but I felt like Heather had escalated our issues significantly. She avoided making eye contact with me and said nothing to me on Saturday. I was feeling a lot of lava inside of me, but I wasn't going to let her talk about it. I finally took action to escalate the situation after she left the house twice more and returned looking exactly the same. She was getting ready to go out with her girlfriends once more on this Friday night. I tossed them to Sue as she was giving me the runaround about not waiting up for her, as she was honking for her in the driveway. Time paused when she caught them. It was a 3-piece set of armor. She was dumbfounded, but at this point I didn't care what she thought. "I just want to make sure you don't bring anything back with you that's contagious. There is a ton of crap out there and I don't want my kids picking up anything your lovers might give you." She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. I turned around and went into the kitchen, thinking, "Your lover is probably waiting for you and you don't want to be late, do you?" I had my response as soon as I heard the door close. By 11, she was at home. It stopped mattering if she was intoxicated or not, even if I wasn't sure. It took her a long time to go to bed, even though I pretended to be asleep. Nothing occurred, but I was waiting for something, anything, to see if there was even a chance to salvage what we once had. She may have attempted to speak with me on Saturday morning a few times, but she broke off before saying anything. When I got ready to go out while wife was cooking supper and put on my best suit, it did stun the hell out of her. I proceeded to put on my preferred cologne and release 2 mists into the atmosphere to ensure Heather would take notice. I said, "Don't wait up for me," and left the house to go alone to supper. I just wanted to let her know that she wasn't the only one who had someone interested in them. I didn't have a date or any idea where I was heading. After dinner at Denny's, I went bowling, which I hadn't done in a very long time. Naturally, I was terrible. In my first game, I hardly cracked 100, and by the 4th, I was using muscles I hadn't used in 10 years, and my arm and thumb were hurting, but it was still enjoyable. I made jokes with the groups beside me and even made eye contact with a few of the women who weren't escorted. Was there going to be more? Not really. I wasn't even remotely interested in any of them, and I already had enough issues without beginning an affair. I spent an additional 30 minutes driving around the town to make sure I didn't return home before midnight. Her waiting for me didn't come as a surprise. I threw my suit jacket over my shoulder and ignored her as I passed by. This was a game that two could play. The following Friday night, Heather stayed home, but by 7 o'clock on Saturday, I had dressed and left. I saw the first part of the new Harry Potter film, went to a Boston market for dinner, then attended a comedy club to catch their 10:30 adult act. I didn't have to drive this time, so I stopped at a bar for a nightcap before heading home at almost 1 in the morning. I enjoyed myself even by myself. I was sick of being the odd man out in my own marriage, even though it would have been more enjoyable to be with someone else. This time, she was in bed, and although she appeared to be asleep, I knew she wasn't. After giving myself a thorough wash and brushing my teeth, I went to bed feeling as naked as the day I was born. I remained on my side of the bed, waiting for her to speak or act, but nothing happened as it had in the past. At breakfast, Heather asked, "Have fun last night?" "Yes, I did." "I appreciate you asking," I grinned. Though I wasn't playing her little game and she wasn't trying to provoke a quarrel with me this morning, it wasn't exactly what she meant to say. The kids had gone into the kitchen by now, and we were all getting settled in for what used to be our regular Sunday morning meal. Children typically don't notice what's going on between adults unless it's noisy or involves them. They had little reason to worry because we were no longer fighting or doing much together. I had very much given up on my marriage and was looking forward to whatever life had in store for me, so I wasn't worried either. I could have waited till the kids were older, but since she was acting in a way I knew she was doing now, I had had enough of her. But one thing did change, my attitude, and my coworkers noticed it. "Steve, you've been in such a good mood lately. I'm glad the gloom and doom Steve is gone," said Debbie, our office secretary, as I greeted her and grinned broadly good morning. I had my 2 kids and no one else to run home to at the end of the day, so I stopped watching the clock. Nobody commented when I brought one of the single gals to lunch at the office. But after a few months, folks started talking to everyone else instead of just to me when it became ingrained. It was time to make some adjustments in my life. There was no point in waiting for the other shoe to fall. The kids were upstairs finishing their homework and had already eaten when Heather arrived home late on Thursday. I gave her a hard look when we first looked at each other. "Damn, he must be great in bed. I haven't seen you with that satisfied a look on your face in years. I hope he was worth it." "Steve, you don't have clue what you're taking about. You just think you know everything when you don't know crap. Anything you say, hon," I grinned in response. "By the way, are you going with me to Ken and Pan's BBQ this Saturday?" "No, can do. I'll probably have plans." "You don't like our friends anymore?" "No, because by this point, all the wives think I'm a jerk and the boys undoubtedly think I'm a wimp for letting you play about with me." "I'm not playing games with you," she yelled back at me. "Well, you're receiving it from someone else if it's not from me, and to be honest, I don't give a damn anymore. In any case, they won't be my neighbors anytime soon." I'd been holding on to that one for the perfect opportunity. "What in the world are you discussing right now?" "Our house goes on the market for sale starting tomorrow." "What say you?" "That cannot be done by you without my approval. Won't have much of an impact anytime soon. You won't be able to pay the house payments after the divorce, and I guarantee you won't pay for a house so you and your new partner can live together on my dime." "What divorce? Sweetheart, have you not been paying attention to us? I estimate that we might barely be able to pay off the house, the 2 cars, and the majority of our credit card debt. In this manner, each of us will be able to start over somewhere new. Me, I'm eyeing a little apartment located approximately 3 blocks from my place of employment. Walking to work will allow me to save a ton of gas money." Heather was astonished by what I was saying and simply stood there, gaping open. "You realize that you've finally lost it. You've finally reached your breaking point." "Maybe, but at least I won't have to deal with a cold-hearted woman much longer. Read my lips, I am not cheating on you, understand? At this point, I don't really care. I don't think a divine intervention could bring back what we once had because it is far gone. I'm over your erratic behavior, silly games, and marriage to my hand. I would prefer a regular life with a loving and caring wife, that is, anyone other than you. Thus, you are free to go out and screw anybody you want without worrying about me because, to be honest, you haven't worried about me in a few years." After saying my piece, I went upstairs to my bedroom. Even though it was early, I felt somewhat exhausted. I kissed both of the kids, told them a tale, and informed them that their mother would be getting up shortly to put them to bed. I got undressed and went to bed at 9:30, and strangely, I fell asleep immediately after brushing my teeth. Our lawn had a for sale sign the following day. I thought the weekend would be long, so on Friday night, I picked up 2 movies that the kids could enjoy. Friday night was presumably Heather's outing, so I had plenty of time to spend alone with the kids. The for sale sign was in bits by the side of the home when I turned into the driveway. It didn't really matter because everyone these days looked at the MLS listing, which is where it was listed. Both of my kids asked me, "Dad, are we really selling our house?" "Yes, we are sports, but don't worry, we'll be just fine." "See, I told you we were moving," my son David informed Megan, his younger sister. They might not enjoy the impending changes, but they would persevere because they possessed resilience. "You guys really selling the house?" My neighbor Ken asked me when I brought the trash cans outside to the curb. I grinned and added, "Yup, caught Heather cheating on me and divorcing the woman." With a little surprised expression, he expressed his regret and said he would miss us before heading back to his home. Knowing his wife Pam, I reasoned that the entire neighborhood would find out in an hour. Heather angrily declared, "We're not selling the house." As soon as I entered the kitchen, arms folded in front of her, she declared, "You can't sell it without my permission and I'm not giving it. When the house falls into foreclosure, we won't receive anything out of it. In this manner, we'll at least receive a few dollars if we sell it. The house is not for sale. Suit yourself." I was not going to argue with anyone about it. To change, I went upstairs. I knew it was going to be a noisy night after hearing 2 phone calls. I put on a t-shirt and shorts and heard people say things like "Jesus Christ," and he said what? I awoke to find the lioness in her kitchen, beard down the stairs. "You admitted to cheating on you and that we were divorcing Ken and his wife. Are you insane? For real?" She let out a cry. "Probably for staying this long, but what's the big deal?" She screamed back at me. "The big deal is that everyone in our neighborhood thinks I'm some kind of tramp. That's what the big deal is. At least 2 of the neighborhood's wives already know you're a cheating woman. What's the big deal if everyone else knows?" Heather had not anticipated the way things were going to unfold tonight. "We're not selling the house and we're not getting a divorce, and that's final. So that means you want me to stop the divorce papers from being served on you at your office tomorrow." The walls of our marriage were crumbling one by one. "What in the world is wrong with you, Steve? Are you ill or something? Have you not heard a word I have said? There isn't an affair going on." "Heather, you see that's not even the issue anymore, even though I have proof that you did." She was unaware that I didn't, though. "I don't care if you don't understand. I no longer want to be married to you. Look, I'm not accusing you of adultery because, in this situation, it really doesn't matter. I will simply state that there are irreconcilable differences. All we need to do is sign the documents and move on with our lives. What more do you want? I'm paying child support and giving you half of everything." She kept saying, "I don't want a damn divorce," without tiring. "All right, I'll take a taste. Do you intend to remain married? So, I'd like you to make a list of the reasons you wish to remain married to me, and I'll review it. We can try again with a few adjustments if I find 2 good grounds to halt the divorce. However, you sign the documents if I don't see at least 2 of you, right?" She gave a nod. She left me to figure out what we were all going to have for supper tonight when she walked upstairs. Grilled hamburgers and hot dogs are a man's best friend. With the addition of a tossed salad and a kettle of macaroni and cheese, dinner was prepared in under 45 minutes. "We're ready for dinner," I said to everyone nearby. With an envelope in hand, Heather descended the stairs and set it on the counter. "We'll talk about this after the kids go to bed. This ought to be fascinating." Our children appeared to be at the center of everything we discussed these days. Politics, work, and noteworthy topics hadn't been discussed in a long time. I had planned to discuss the sale of the house, but I reasoned that would be a different matter once the kids were asleep. They went upstairs by 7:30 to get ready for bed and tidy up. I was tempted to read the letter she had written, but I assumed it would contain the same nonsense I had heard a million times over. She down the stairs and grabbed a Diet Coke from the refrigerator at little before 9 o'clock. Thinking it might get a little testy, I reached for the half bottle of wine I'd started a few days before. After giving me the envelope, she played with her Coke while seated across from me at the kitchen table. Her only request was to read them all before you say anything. I read the list after tearing open the envelope. "You've got to be kidding me." "Nope," she snapped back. The first 4 points, which I had just skimmed, were roughly what I had anticipated. 4 things would happen: the kids would be heartbroken, we would both go bankrupt, I would lose custody, and most importantly, she would still love me. Much like a cat or dog, I mused to myself. Point 5 made me flush and took the breath out of my lungs. All it stated was, "I'm pregnant." Does the father know? Now he does. "You are the father, illiterate." Not at all. It's been so long since I've seen what's between your legs that I doubt I could identify it in a bloody police lineup. It's yours, even if you don't think so. At first, I didn't think it was real, but after using 3 test kits, I was convinced. Since I don't get morning sickness, I assumed that the reason I missed my first period was the tension from our recent argument. However, I chose to put myself to the test when I missed my second period. I need to visit my obstetrician right away, so I have an appointment with him to get it confirmed, but that's just a formality. "Sorry, you're not going to try and pawn someone else's kid off on me as mine. I'm not that stupid." I figured you'd say that, but whether you believe it or not, it is yours. All right, just to make an argument, let's suppose it might be mine. The 2 queries I have are, how and when. I'm to blame for the how, stupid, as we hadn't been engaging in it frequently lately. How about not at all? When I interrupted, she gave me a disapproving glance. She got back to work. I stopped taking my birth control pills since they always made me sick, especially since we haven't been together recently. I couldn't become pregnant if we weren't doing it, and if I did, there would always be protection. What about all the other people you love? Or did everyone use protective gear? She brushed the question aside. Remember that time you caught me off guard as I was getting out of the shower and you wouldn't accept no? We were doing it before my brain caught up, and you were in one of your moods. I recalled every time we did it and how it felt after we hadn't done it for a very long time. I added, taking another jab. That was one of our more memorable sessions. You even moved a little. She gave me another glaring glance. You now understand the why and how. Feeling content. Just for fun, when did you intend to inform me in any case? En route to the medical facility. I knew I would have to do this soon because I won't be able to keep it a secret from anyone for very long. In addition, I knew you would be upset and that we would need to start making preparations, which is why I waited. You really think I'm real, don't you? Not a chance, because I'm still not sure I own it. I believe that you're attempting to hide your tracks because someone emptied a load on you. In order to put an end to this ridiculous marriage, I believe a small DNA test is necessary. I thought you said if the list contained 2 legitimate reasons you'd stop the divorce. And I meant it, but I only see one, and that's the one that says our kids will be devastated. How about the one that says I still love you? Please, that's a load of nonsense, as you and I both know. I wouldn't have endured what you've caused me to endure over the past year or so if someone else loved me. Not to mention playing tricks on me. Steve, maybe I went a little nuts going out with Sue in the group. She turned to face me. She tossed me the 3-pack of protection I'd thrown at her weeks before and remarked, okay, I went a lot nuts and maybe stepped over the line a couple of times, but I didn't screw anyone. This provides no evidence. You could have gotten into this situation by riding them bareback, or they may have had their own. Steve, how many times do I have to tell you, it's your baby? How many times must I tell you, Heather, that I no longer trust a word that comes out of your mouth? To demonstrate that I'm not the father, a test is required. There is, but it's only 100% accurate when given after the baby is born, and no judge in the world is going to grant a final divorce decree until he's sure of the baby's parentage. She completed her assignment. Why don't we just wait until after our baby is born? You mean your baby, don't you? No, I mean our baby. Our kitchen was quiet for the next few minutes. What if I do this action? Instead of serving you at work as I had intended, I just give you the documentation so you can review it with the attorney of your choosing. I don't want a stinking divorce, no matter how many times I have to repeat it. The topic we ought to be discussing is what we're going to do with our infant and where it will sleep. I was about to recommend that we call it quits on the pregnancy, but I knew neither of us would take that route. You two can always hang out in the basement. You two will be very comfy after I lay a bed down there. I'm not leaving my bedroom. Well, I'm not either, I answered back. I guess that means we'll just have to suck it up and share it. Shouldn't be a problem. I've been living with a roommate for the last couple of years anyway. What's a few more months? I had to make one more joke, but we both realized it was not going to be as easy as we were making it seem. Which term is it? Speech is cheap. She quit wearing her wedding band when I stopped wearing mine. Due to some incapacity to consume alcohol, she stopped going out on Friday nights, but suddenly her friends were visiting her at home. I wanted to throw up, but I tried to be kind and say nothing when they started staring at me with condescending stares. What then did I do? I went on dates. You're going on a date? Heather screamed at me as I was getting ready. Not really a date, more like just dinner. If you've forgotten, you're still married to me, remember? How am I going to forget? Your constant presence here serves as a daily reminder to me. What do we have, though? How long till you pop? 5 months. Tears filled her eyes, and she bolted from the bedroom. Did I feel awful? Both yes and no. I would have felt guilty about how I was treating her if it were my child, but given how she had treated me over the past few months, a little retaliation was necessary. Nancy and I had been going to lunch alternately for a few months. I told her the truth about where I was. I informed her that I was just legally married. I mentioned that I would most likely get divorced, but that I would have to wait until the baby was born. I told her I'd leave it up to her when she asked how far I wanted to take it between us. Dessert was amazing, but dinner was nice too. After we joked around, I arrived home at a little after 1 in the morning. Without taking a shower, I undressed, washed my teeth, swished some mouthwash around, and went to bed. I was determined to ensure that Heather was aware of my actions. The following morning, while I prepared breakfast for everyone, her eyes followed me around the kitchen and said it all. She waited for the children to exit the room, at least. How were you able to? Before going to bed last night, you could have at least had the grace to take a shower and get rid of her stench. I have to disinfect the sheets and strip the bed now. Don't worry, I used a protection so at least she won't end up pregnant. I would already be dead if appearances could kill. Well, it looks like we now have an open marriage, so I guess you won't have any problem with me getting a little for a change. Trying to stare me down, Heather said. Go for it. You initiated it, therefore I assume you will see it through to the end. I didn't start it, you did. Heather, I might not be the most knowledgeable person in the shed, but I also am not a moron. Don't try to tell me it was just a girl's night out. I saw the expression on your face that first night. Not to mention that Thursday night when you arrived home beaming from ear to ear. You hadn't appeared that content with me, as I mentioned, in a very long time. Don't act haughty toward me or like a newlywed who is blushing. Your recent acts have put the finishing touches on a marriage that you tore up a long time ago. I don't care anymore, so go ahead and spread your legs for anybody you want. If you can locate someone who wants to screw, that is. I used all the sarcasm and fury I could summon in my words. Heather started crying as she hurried to our bedroom and shut the door. It appears that the children and I had the remainder of the day to ourselves. In addition to picking up a few things at Home Depot, we went grocery shopping. I guess I didn't stay away long enough since Sue was over when we got home. Sue came out as I was putting everything away, changing the spark plug in my lawnmower, and getting ready to cut the grass. The manner you're treating Heather should make you feel ashamed of yourself. She's your wife and she's carrying your child, damn it. Sue, that remains to be seen, and besides, if you, Pam, and Carol hadn't taken her out and got her laid, we wouldn't be in this mess now, would we? Steve, she didn't go out and get laid as you so eloquently put it. So, what name would you like to give it? Did the big nasty showered, or perhaps went looking for a partner for sex? The fact that she kept returning meant it had to be someone nice. In a few months, Heather will look like she has a basketball in there, so I hope he enjoys doing it over a hump. Right then, I had no sympathy for her or anyone else. Steve, you don't know crap, but you are going to ruin your marriage. Sue, it's already ruined, I'm just covering it up with dirt, so to speak. She gave me a nasty look, shook her head, and left me to mow my lawn. Aside from the kids chatting about the movie we were going to see after dinner, supper was quiet. Despite having watched it in a theater, they never grew weary of the third installment of the Harry Potter series. After it was ended, I got them both ready for bed, read them a little tale apiece, and then I kissed them goodnight because Heather was nowhere to be seen. When I came in, Heather was reading in bed. I just added, "The kids are expecting a goodnight kiss," as I turned to go to the restroom. It took me 20 minutes to finish the rest after a much-needed shower. I used to shave at night to avoid burning my bride's whiskers as we made out on our bed. Although a considerable time had passed since then, it did evoke happy recollections of the past. I came back into the bedroom to find Heather had put her book down and was waiting for me. She asked if we could talk, and I was reaching for a pair of night shorts, still nude. Roughly speaking, I believe that we both understand where we are with one another, and it will only take time for us to learn who is truly carrying the baby. She wasn't pleased with the way the talk was going. I acknowledge that I haven't been your most devoted and loving wife in a while, but it wasn't on purpose. Simply put, I never seemed to catch up with everyone tugging me in a million different places when things were so frantic. And I apologize for that. False. I was cut off from you a long time ago. Despite the fact that I was there for you, you seemed to have other plans. God knows that I tried, but in the end, I gave up on you and the remnants of our marriage. Thus, all we're doing at this point is counting down the weeks till this nightmare ends. Well, what are you going to do when you find out that it truly is your baby? Well, I guess I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I had said enough. They say, life goes on. What? The kids required both of us to raise them right now, thus it was necessary to pay the expenses. Although Heather made every effort to restore normalcy to our lives, nothing remained normal. When I told her I would take her to the next neighborhood party, I really shocked the living daylights out of her. You're not going to embarrass me and the kids, are you? Don't you trust me anymore? About as much as you trust me, darling. Nothing was altered. While the children were playing in the backyard, the women gathered in the kitchen to discuss Heather's unborn child. What about the guys? Well, on the back deck we were taking some tips. Steve, it's unbelievable that you have the courage to go on a dang date. Before I could even leave the house, Carol would chop off my nuts. If Pam had let me go, she probably would have told me that I needed to go to bed at some point. The group laughed, though it was a controlled laugh as they kept their eyes on the open kitchen door. Just the thought of what she might do then makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, they murmured. I just got tired of begging for it, and since I wasn't getting it at home any longer, I decided that I wasn't going to do without any longer. Her husband said, looking downcast, Sue said that Heather is going to divorce you, you know that, don't you? All right. In what way will that be worse? Would you continue to live with your wife if you were informed you could never have slept with her again? Or would you locate another person? I continue to look and savor every moment of it. All I have is debt, and Heather can have half of that. I will have to pay child support, but I already do that, so what's the difference? I'm looking for someone who is caring, uncontrollable, and appreciates spending time with me a few times a week, not once or twice every other month. I downed the remainder of my beer. Sue's husband moved in closer to me and said, okay, what are you going to do if she is carrying your kid? All right, buddy, if and when I receive the test results, I'll decide on that. However, I wouldn't have to worry about that if your wife and her close friends hadn't taken her out and gotten her laid, would I? I confronted him directly. And since your wife was with Heather all those times, I guess I don't have the only tramp in the neighborhood. It wasn't a very long fight. I managed to win the altercation by throwing a few punches and pulling him off with a split nose, all the while Carol's husband shielded me from him. Jesus Christ, can't I leave you alone for even a few minutes without you making a fool out of yourself? Running out of the kitchen with the other wives, according to Heather. I was only protecting your dignity. Sue's spouse said that you were a tramp, and I responded by telling him that since his wife spent so many nights with you, so did she. Come on, we're going home. I had been anticipating trying Ken's ribs, but it didn't seem like it was going to happen right now. Even though Heather was upset, the kids didn't mind that we ended up ordering pizza in. If you could say such a thing about Heather, things got much more tight. I suppose that going on dates every few weeks may have contributed to it. but for once, I was truly bonding with someone. One night as we were in bed, Heather stated, "I don't want you dating anymore. It's degrading to me, especially when you're seen by people we know, which you have been. I thought you were the one that said we now have an open marriage and we're okay with it." "You said that. I never said that." "You'll note that I haven't, but I just claimed that since you were out getting banged, I would too. I guess that's your problem, not mine." "Steve, look, if you need a little relief, I'm here for you, and besides, I could use a little something myself once in a while." "Calm down, my heart. Are you genuinely requesting that I share a bed with you? I think we ought to notify the Pope that I've just seen a real miracle." "You don't need to be so snarky. I was merely expressing that, given our shared presence here, we may potentially fulfill each other's needs. You sure your partner won't lose it? You aware of my tampering with his belongings?" "Steve, there is no boyfriend and never has been." "You say that now, but I can prove it." I patted her abdomen. "You're a trash, you know that. And you're just a cheap whore," I shot back. "So what does that make you, a cheap whore like me?" "A married man having extramarital affairs with his spouse." "Satisfied?" I cried, realizing that I had probably said too much, but there was nothing to undo. She turned over and attempted to fall asleep. Lying on my back, I contemplated my next course of action in the event that the baby proved to be mine. I wasn't expecting that particular scenario to come to pass. In the end, we managed to come to a kind of agreement. Though the amount of sex was more than I'd seen in the previous 5 years, it wasn't like we were newlyweds again. There was no longer any motive to go on dates, but I couldn't help but feel that we might want to try again in the future. We have all had a difficult month. Heather was as big as a house, and the kids were thrilled to have a baby sister or brother. She would work for 1 more week and then wait for the baby's birth throughout the remainder of her pregnancy. It appears that I was the only one who wasn't entirely thrilled about the new grandchild, as our parents were both overjoyed about the arrival. "Are you going to be in the delivery room?" she said one evening as we were tidying up from dinner. "I'm not sure that's such a good idea." "Well, you've been in there for all our other kids, and I'd like you there when our baby is born." I was about to say your baby, but I suppose we were both sick of the cheap shots by now, and she already knew what was on my mind. "Sure, why not? I mean, what more need to get done? In this manner, we can avoid paying for a DNA test if it turns out to be negative." She glanced at me, shed a few tears, and waddled off to our bedroom. I went with her. As she collapsed onto our bed in tears, I apologized for the insensitive comment, saying it was out of line. "I know you're as anxious as I am about this being over, and if you want, I'll be there." For once, she grinned and expressed her desire for that. She became anxious when the baby remained unborn for more than 3 weeks after the scheduled mid-October birth. The doctor assured us that due dates are only estimates and are subject to change, citing the baby's sovereignty. What makes newborns insist on coming into the world at odd hours? At 1:45, I called my parents to ask them to watch the kids while I loaded Heather into our minivan. I told myself, relax, breathe, the entire way to the hospital. Although it had been a while, I can't claim we were experts at it, but there weren't many surprises. My wife said there were never enough medicine. Labor was still a bitch, and I was certain I would be living with her fingerprints on my forearm for the next year or two. Our ordeal came to an end when our newborn girl cried. As they put the baby on Heather's chest, I was exhausted, but she was completely exhausted. She wasn't exactly black or brown, that much was clear. The nurse removed her after about a minute, and my wife was on her way to the recovery room. I went outside into the hallway and began calling people. My mother inquired, "What did you name her?" And I realized, for the first time in these months, that we had never discussed names. We'd never really discussed names. I'd always called it her baby and she'd respond, "Our baby." That presented another problem to tackle, though. With her dark hair, petite nose, and plump cheeks, she resembled nearly every other infant in the nursery. At this point in the game, how can mothers and grandmothers identify who she looked like? Could I identify my child if it was? Not in a million years. I knew right away what a swab sample was for when a doctor wanted to take one. I was feeling conflicted as I waited for Heather to be given a room. The infant would be home before we received the test results because the DNA test may take up to a week. I had to set aside my emotions and doubts. The new baby had never been asked to be born into this mess, and even if it wasn't mine, it wasn't her fault either. Heather was exhausted, and neither the company nor the presence of their brother helped. I ejected everyone around 7 o'clock. For the first time, we would be spending time alone with the newborn as my parents watched the kids for an additional night. With a kiss on her forehead, my beaming wife exclaimed, "She's beautiful, isn't she?" I was expecting her to say something along the lines of, "She has your eyes," but I believe she realized she should hold off for the time being. "Your parents are assembling the changing table and the new crib they just dropped off tomorrow. To make more room for everything, I'm going to move the bed to the opposite wall." For a further 30 minutes, we conversed, but we never got to the topic of our shared concerns. Seeking some direction, I informed my wife, "We're going to have to pick out a name pretty soon. They're asking me what we want on her birth certificate." "We've got plenty of time. I'm just thankful she's healthy." It was a long time since I had seen her that joyful. With a quick kiss, I left the place. Regardless of what might occur later, I had a ton of work to accomplish. I couldn't keep my eyes off the baby furnishings that night as I lay in bed. I wasn't sure if I was simply exhausted or if I was worn out, but I was genuinely excited to bring our baby girl home with us. The following day, I took the kids to meet their new sister and warned them that they would need to behave very well when we brought her home. I told them we were still thinking of names and asked for their recommendations when they inquired what we had named her. Though they came up with a name I liked, Brittany, most of the other names wouldn't fit. By the fourth day, all of them had returned home. Everything was in disarray, our bedroom had already been moved, and there was an abundance of baby food and diapers in stock. Everything was normal, as I mentioned. With the baby, we had a nice weekend. On Monday, I kept my mouth shut about the baby. In the morning, work was a little frantic, but by the afternoon, everything had settled down. I picked up dinner for everyone at Subway on my way home because I was looking forward to a calm evening. I had barely backed into the driveway when her folks started to leave. After emptying the food bag onto the kitchen counter, I headed to find my family. Everyone was playing with the baby in our bedroom when I came in. I stood at the door and watched my wife play with Brittany's little feet while my kids giggled. David exclaimed, "They're so tiny," and put his finger to them. Observing the four of them made my heart melt. "You were that small at one time and look how big you are now." I crept back downstairs and let myself in much more noisily this time. Peering around the corner, I asked, "Who's ready for dinner?" They just said, me, as they ran down the steps. My wife grinned at me and said, "Give me a minute while I put Brittany down and then I'll join you." Right now, life was fairly wonderful. All at once, everyone was discussing anything and everything. After supper, I helped the kids and Heather finish the dishes while she went upstairs to tend to the baby. It was simple because we had used paper plates and everything went in the garbage. It was time for lights out after a few of games. With a tale, a little of hilarity, and a last embrace and kiss, they were rendered unconscious. I didn't think they'd ever settle down, I remarked as I was getting ready for bed and observed my spouse tending to the infant. She was just putting her to sleep in the crib when I finished brushing and flossing and went back into our bedroom. "I'm going to miss what we've had over the last couple of months," she stated. She said, "We were almost back to the way we were when we first got married." Her expression was blank. She handed me an official-looking paper and said, "I would have bet my life on it that you were the father, but I guess I was drunker than I thought that night because I really don't remember it even happening." When I got to the last paragraph, which essentially stated that there was no way I was Brittany's father, it was all meaningless to me when I first started reading it. "Heather," I started to say, but she interrupted me with a wave of her hand. "I already know what you're going to say, so you don't even have to. I've signed the divorce papers and they're sitting on your desk downstairs in the den. If you can find a qualified buyer for the house, go for it. I won't stand in your way anymore. Brittany and I are moving in with my parents tomorrow, so you won't have to look at us anymore. My mom will get the kids off to school in the morning and you can pick them up at her house on your way home from work. I'm so damn sorry, but I'm glad it's finally over. At least one of us will be able to move on with their life." That was when she left, headed for the den. All I felt was shock and numbness. Though it's possible, it's important to remember that planning something and making it happen are two entirely different things. Damn it, we were good now. For the love of Christ, why in the world was this happening to me? To avoid waking Brittany, I wailed like a baby while sitting on the bed for the next 30 minutes, hiding my lips when I cried too loudly. I spent the remainder of the evening lying on my back in bed, wallowing in self-pity as I tried to think of what in the world I should do next. I couldn't stay here and face Heather this morning, and by 5:30 I had no answers. I had the feeling of a dish rag that has been squeezed too hard. I had a shower, but I neglected to clean my teeth or shave. I didn't even pick up the newspaper on the steps, let alone make coffee or prepare the kids' breakfast. I just walked out. Right now, I had to get out of here as quickly and far as possible. I arrived at work on autopilot and got myself a cup of coffee. I was still sitting in my chair, wearing my jacket, even though it was getting cold by 9 o'clock. 3 messages were shown on my phone, even though I hadn't heard it ring. My secretary brought me a new cup of coffee at 10 o'clock and inquired if there was anything she could do. I got up and went to work, saying, "No, I don't think anyone can fix this now." Heather and the baby had left when I arrived home. She had written a note on the door stating that I could pick up the kids tomorrow, but she would prefer to keep them tonight so she could talk to them. It was not signed at all. As I made my way upstairs to our bedroom, I saw that everything was vanished, including the infant's clothes, new furnishings, and personal belongings from the bathroom. When I entered our children's bedroom, their pajamas were strewn on the floor and their beds were not made, just as they had left them this morning. The thing that shocked me the most was that, despite definitely should have, I didn't drink myself into a stupor on Monday night when I skipped meals. It hurt because my brain was overworking itself. I desired to have no emotions. My desire was to go to sleep. It was not going to end the way I wanted this nightmare to. We got through the night together on Tuesday even though I had a conversation with the kids myself in between sobs. The remainder of the week flew by, and the only thing I had to do over the weekend was spend time reflecting, which was the last thing I wanted to do. 3 weeks later, I was worn out, exhausted, but still alive. Kids are resilient, and I was right. We established a routine and followed it religiously. I could get along quite fine as long as I knew what needed to be done. I discovered a letter bearing my name on the kitchen counter at some point in the first month. It ended up sitting unopened there because I knew who it was from. My mother and mother-in-law saved my life by doing tasks that I was unable to perform. Although I was gradually returning to reality, I had come a long way from where I had been a few months prior. I knew all the answers back then, like I mentioned. It's simple until the hypothetical situations arise. I had more than my fair share of anger, but I controlled it or punched a wall when my kids weren't seeing because when I let it fly, it scared them. My next-door neighbors. They all kept their distance, with the exception of my neighbor Ken and his wife Pam. Despite being invited, I never attended their get-togethers. When I once spotted Sue and her husband at the mall, I felt enraged and wanted to punch him out once more. I smiled at them both as they moved across the aisle and kept their distance, but even from 20 feet away, I could see the scar on the front of his nose. 90 days later, everything was agreed upon and in black and white, so I was back to being single. Everything was divided evenly, even our shared child custody. Since that evening, I hadn't talked to Heather, and since our parents were taking care of the kids, I didn't really need to. The house didn't sell, which was our only significant issue. There were no buyers despite my 2 price reductions. We really could have used that money to pay for everything, so even though it was probably still too expensive, I wasn't going to give it away. Megan and David were doing great. They had come to terms with the reality that we were no longer a family, but it had become normal for them because they saw their mother and new sister on a daily basis. I took care of the most of the extracurricular events and the school business, and occasionally I thought I saw Heather. My work was going well, as expected in a down economy, and I was the only single guy in the office, so I had the honor of being the talk of the workplace. Being single wasn't all that it was cracked up to be, especially with 2 little children at home, but I did date a few ladies and even get laid more often than not. Neighbor boys introduced me to friends and, heaven forbid, family, but it never worked out. I would typically tell them to get out of it because it was too soon and too raw. The location of the envelope on the counter was the only item that remained the same. After more than a year had passed, Heather's mother had still not spoken to her or the child, but I had the feeling that she was eager to share something. My mother was, I know that. However, Heather and Brittany honored our formal agreement, which said that they would never be discussed with me again, even if it meant death. My 2 children told me everything I needed to know. In fact, they told me more than I really cared to know because they spent most of their days with their mother and stepsister at their grandparents' house after school. Heather's mother suffered a stroke when she was 14 months and 6 days old. Her days of being a babysitter were now ended because she nearly died. I went to see her in the hospital a lot, and I always missed Heather. My mother assumed the role of babysitter, but she eventually found it to be too much. We had to come up with another solution. Our chat began. Heather, this is Steve. Do you have a minute to talk? I expressed my regret for her mother's passing to her and told her to ask for support if needed. As you know, Mom has been taking care of the kids, but it's not working and we're going to need to figure out something else. Can we get together and talk about it or something? I have no idea what she was thinking, but I had to practically drag her out of her response. I guess I can come over Saturday afternoon. How about 2 o'clock? That works, and I'll even throw something on the grill and we can have dinner here. Steve, you don't have to do that. That wasn't so bad, I thought. I'll see you on Saturday. No problem. Although we had been sharing all the costs since the beginning, that was the first meaningful discussion we had since that evening. I felt rather pleased with myself. Neither David nor Megan thought it was particularly noteworthy. What was the big deal about their mother coming over for dinner when they saw her all the time? Conversely, I was a tangle of nerves. I made sure the house was tidy and wore a casual outfit. I was unsure of the kind of response I would receive because I hadn't changed the locks. I hollered from the back patio that the door was open, and she rang the bell before letting herself in. Compared to her previous appearance, she had lost weight, her hair had grown out, and she wore either very little or no makeup. It seems that she wasn't trying to impress me. Before she asked if I had any Diet Coke, she brought a pie and placed it on the kitchen counter. Everything you could possibly want is in the refrigerator, I added, pulling out the picnic table's umbrella for the rear deck. I figure we can eat out here tonight if that's okay with you. She murmured, her voice barely audible. That sounds fine, she said. I asked her if she had any suggestions for something to do while the kids were playing video games in the den. I've thought about a couple, but how about you? Well, I first thought about a nanny, I said as I reached for a lager, but since it's only an hour or so in the morning and only a couple hours in the evening, no one is going to want those few hours, and if they do, we won't be able to afford them. Then I asked around the neighborhood to see if anyone knew someone who might like a couple of hours of babysitting, but I drew a blank again. I finished my bottle of beer. If I could just change my hours, that would solve the morning problem, but we still had the problem with after school. I could probably trust the kids at home for 30 minutes by themselves, but a couple of hours was out of the question. I couldn't think of anything. I have a suggestion, but I'm sure you won't agree, Heather stated, glancing directly at me. Well, it has to be better than what I've come up with so far. I wouldn't be so sure until you hear what it is. Well, shoot and we'll hash it over. Well, you know Mom is going to need a lot of rehab and Dad is going to have his hands full from now on. I've been toying with the idea of finding my own place, to get out of their hair. You've got an empty basement, and if we could fix it up a bit, Brittany and I could move in downstairs, and that would solve all our problems. I was still thinking, you have an empty basement. Don't you want to be, on your own? Steve, we're still making house payments, and although we've cut out all the extras, money is still tight. I can find a place, but with that and childcare, we're going to be back where we were a year and a half ago. My mouth wasn't working. She discovered it after getting up and getting another can of soda. It had become such a fixture on my counter that I'd nearly forgotten it was there, so I wasn't trying to hide it. She picked up the envelope, checked to make sure it wasn't opened, and then replaced it in its original location. Well, think about what I said, and if you can come up with a better idea, let me know. Heather, I'm not sure that would work. She was right about that one, but I wasn't too fond of the recollections of her last day here. I said you wouldn't like it, but until we sell this house we're both kind of stuck, and it's not like we've never lived together. Let's eat and we can talk more after dinner. I had corn on the cob boiling on the stove and 2 racks of ribs cooking well on the barbecue. After assisting with the preparation of a tossed salad, we gathered around the table for 30 minutes. I said, chewing into a corn kernel drenched in butter, "How is work going?" "Good, but I had to cut back on my hours since Mom got sick. I just want to make sure I don't piss them off and get laid off, that I couldn't afford right now." "They wouldn't do that, you've been with them for years." "Steve, in this economy no one's job is safe. We had to cut 3 girls just after the first of the year. Thank God I know how to do everything in the office, or I might have been one of them that got cut. How about you?" "Surprisingly, we're doing pretty good. Business is down but better than it was last year. I think if we can make it through this year we're home free." "You don't know how lucky you are." I chuckled to myself. Lucky? Yeah, right. I used to be. As Heather loaded the dishes into the dishwasher, I cleared away the food. Food was brought in, and David and Megan refrigerated everything. I used my wire brush to give the racks a thorough cleaning and burnt off any leftover food and drippings on the grill. After I dropped the umbrella, I finished up. Heather was nowhere to be seen in the den, where the kids were playing games or watching television. As I searched the main level, I wondered, she didn't leave, did she? I discovered her wandering around the basement. She was thinking to herself, I could make this work, as I approached from behind. "I think this would be a bad idea." "And why is that?" he asked, turning to face me directly. You bringing people home and stuff like that. I think we've done enough to the kids, don't you think?" "So, what you're saying is that you don't want the kids to see their mother screwing around? Is that what you're trying to say?" "No, I'm not saying that at all, it's just that." "Steve, do you date and bring anyone home?" "No, I don't." She laughed, but I didn't, and I was about to hurl her ass out the front door. "So, still doing it by hand?" she asked. She knew she'd hit a raw nerve because she could see the wrath. "Steve, I'm sorry, that was callous and uncalled for. I don't know what I was thinking." I didn't say anything. "Let's go upstairs and talk." I quickly finished the first beer and reached for another. She arranged her thoughts, figuring that since the basement had an exterior door from the garage, it might resemble a mother-in-law residence. "I don't start until 9 so I could get David and Megan off to school, and since I'm done by 3:30 they would only be latchkeyed for about 25 minutes. "Heather, on paper it looks good, but there are a lot of other issues, not to mention a few emotional ones I might have a problem with." She approached the register. "You never read it." "Couldn't. At first I wanted to rip it up into a million pieces and then burn each piece in the fireplace. Then when I finally settled down I didn't want to read how you put horns on me and how long it had been going on. I guess in the end, I felt it would just make me sad all over again, and I couldn't do that to myself again. Believe it or not, I thought up until that night we had a great chance at starting over again, after seeing how we had reconnected after only 3 months. We were a family again, and if it hadn't been for that stupid test we'd still be one. So to answer your question, no, I haven't read it." We were both quiet once more. "Well, if you ever decide to, you'll find it interesting reading. You may not like everything, but I think you owe me that much after 10 years of marriage." I owed her nothing at all. "Well, I've got to go. Think about what I've said. I think it would be a win-win for the both of us. And if we set up some rules about the other things, I think it just might work." I assured her that I would reconsider. Heather gave the kids a hug and kiss and gave me a peck on the cheek before returning to her parents' home. I fingered that silly envelope while sipping 3 more beers in the kitchen. I ripped it open and began reading it at around 2:15 in the morning, after I had finished number 4. One thing she was correct about, to put it mildly, was how enlightening it was. I read the 4 pages once, and then again, not quite believing what she had really written the first time. While most of it was the same old "I'm sorry" nonsense, there were a few things that both saddened and infuriated me. I could never understand why she felt I had no regard for her. She claimed that she felt as though I treated her like a plaything or a piece of meat that I could use anytime I pleased. We were in trouble when she admitted that it had gotten to the point where she felt it was merely her wifely obligation or something she occasionally had to do. It's true that I desired bonding far more than she did, and I occasionally pouted when I didn't receive any, but she was mistaken about that. Putting her to bed made me feel even more connected to her since I loved her. Did the woman use drugs? Although we did dispute occasionally about bonding, I was more irate when we went from seeing each other 3 times a week to twice a month, and only when she was really upset. All I could think was that she was just physically tired of me and that she never gave me an opportunity to make things right before she gave up on us and started seeing other people. Although I thought her purchasing was excessive at times, I knew she would bring up our financial difficulties and the way I had chastised her for buying so much clothes. I simply purchased necessities, reserving the remainder for her or the kids. By now, I was starting to feel fairly good about myself. The true purpose of the letter then became apparent. You have to believe me when I say that I really thought the baby was yours. I never even knew who the man who I guess got me pregnant was. I was so angry with you that night that when Sue and Pam left me at the table to go dance, all I did was down drink after drink. Somewhere between the 5th and 6th drink, I found myself in the back seat of his car. How we got there I haven't a clue, but the next thing I knew, Sue was yelling and dragging me out and punching the man at the same time. That night was basically a complete blank. I remember Sue pouring coffee down my throat and yelling at me for something I'd apparently done. I took a moment to reflect on that evening and tried to recall her returning home. She didn't look all that inebriated when I saw her, but I knew she had to have been drinking. However, it may have been hours earlier. I wasn't sure what had happened exactly, only that I'd stepped over the line, so to speak. When Sue dropped me off, she said not to say anything but to go right to bed. The following morning you looked at me like I was the trash of the earth. You couldn't have known what happened, but the way you looked at me said you did. After that night we made it a point to go out. I wanted to show you that I was independent, didn't need your approval, and wanted to prove to myself other men found me attractive. Who was I kidding? The only thing the men out there wanted was bonding. They could care less what I thought about, what I looked like, only what they could get me to do. The night you threw me the protection, I wasn't meeting anyone other than the girls. When you basically called me a whore, my world came crashing down. That night all we did was go to dinner and talk about our husbands, and what we said wasn't too flattering. You'll notice I didn't go out after that night, but I was shocked when you went out. I at first thought you were bluffing, but when you left I got concerned. If you thought I was screwing around on you, I wasn't sure what you were going to do. When you came home, I was positive you hadn't done anything and was relieved, to say the least. I was planning for some fun the following week, but when you went out again without saying anything, I knew I was in trouble. Everything between us went to hell after that. On that Thursday night when I came home in such a good mood, it wasn't because of what you thought. I found a huge error that one of the lawyers had made on an important case and was praised up and down for what a good job I'd done. The owner of the firm wrote me out a bonus check for $500 right there on the spot. I was floating on air when I walked through the door, and before I could get a word out of my mouth, you called me a cheating woman. I was crushed beyond belief. I hated you for what you said, but I didn't have it in me to confront you that night. She was correct. I hit her with both barrels before she could open her mouth that night, as I recalled. She was partly to blame for her silence as well as my anger. Would I have paid attention to her or trusted her? Now we'll never know, I suppose. The final page discussed her pregnancy discovery. She often expressed her belief that the child was mine, saying, "It had to be, I never slept with anyone else." She added that she nearly left me the next morning, but I broke her heart when I slept with Nancy the first time. She didn't even need to inquire if I had. Steve, I rushed to the store right away and got 2 more after the first test showed positive results. I kept telling myself, Steve is going to kill me, because we were at the lowest point of our marriage and I had to find a way to turn things around so that we could go back to when we were happy. She detailed the dread of eventually understanding that she was pregnant again. It seemed that you had given up on me and our union. Even though we were having terrible conflicts, I refused to give up. I wasn't going to give up without a fight, even if you had to file for divorce. I was not going to give you a divorce, and I also told you that no judge would grant you one considering my condition. It was a bluff, but it worked. I thought I'd finally lost you until I decided to put my cards on the table and tell you that I wanted you and would give you anything you wanted. I'm not a whore, I kept saying over and over when I finally told you that I was pregnant, but you didn't believe me. Over the past 3 months, I was in heaven. All 3 of our honeymoons were combined into one. Even though I knew you still had reservations, every night I tried my hardest to dispel them. I foolishly believed that you were once again mine. I was the happiest woman alive when our baby was born. You were at my side. We were reunited. Maybe I was simply hoping to see it that way, but Brittany seemed to look exactly like you. I knew as soon as I opened that mail that you were our lovely baby girl's father. That morning, I cried till my parents arrived shortly after 2 in the afternoon. I had started crying at 11. They asked me questions that I couldn't answer and offered me the opportunity to move in with them. It wasn't that they wanted me gone, but they didn't have any other option. That evening, you exuded happiness. I was determined to savor every single second with my family. I would have to hurt you because I loved you so much. Before anything occurred, I begged God to end my life, but he refrained. This time, there was no need to wait. The words on that page would not appear to change on their own. I was only thinking about my baby, my 2 amazing kids, and the spouse I was going to swoon over. I didn't give a damn about myself. If the roles had been reversed, I would have screamed, but you didn't. Despite my failures, I could still sense that you loved me. I walked away, unable to stare into those eyes. That night in the den, I died. My life and my marriage had ended. David and Megan didn't understand why I couldn't be with them anymore, but I figured you'd eventually tell them. Sue ended up being my only buddy, and since it was the one and only occasion, we both realized that she had reached me too late that evening. If I could find that man again, I would take care of him and send him to the gallows with a smile on my face. Unfortunately, I can't even recall his appearance. I gave up that right the night I went out and got mad at you, so I'm not going to ask for anything from you or ask for your forgiveness. You stated that you were looking for a devoted and caring wife, and I sincerely hope you find one, as you deserve much more than I could have provided. I'm sorry to say goodbye, but I'm at a loss on what to do. I do and will always love you, and I hope the best for you. I'm not worth the effort, that's all I'm asking of you. Please don't hate me forever. I read it a third time the next morning, sober this time. It was signed by your loving wife, Heather. After dropping my kids off at school, calling into work, and taking a day off, I sat down at the computer and wrote Heather a detailed reply, fueled by more than a few cups of coffee. It wasn't an angry reply, but rather an attempt to correct the record, or my version of it. Anyway, that I didn't give her full credit for ending our already failing marriage, but she was the one who ended it. I only gave up after I saw that we were never going to be happy ever again, and I deserved to be happy. I finished writing after less than 4 hours and drank a full pot of coffee. I pressed enter, sat back, and felt pretty damn proud of myself. She wouldn't agree with much of what I'd written, but she would know it was the truth. We had a nice evening, and right before I went to bed, I checked my email, no reply. I got a terrific night's sleep, went to work feeling rejuvenated, and took on the world. My kids and I went to a Chinese buffet, and I ended up eating way too much. I had to get my money's worth, didn't I? After returning from work 2 days later, I found Heather at the house with the kids playing outside and her waiting for me in the kitchen. At first, I was a little apprehensive, but when she asked if we could talk, I figured why not. We shared supper together, and by 11, agreements were made, preparations were formed, and a new chapter of my life began. There was some laughter, but neither of us found the events humorous. Voices were raised, followed by hugs, kisses, and tears. The following weekend, Heather and Brittany moved into the basement, where I'd finished 2 rooms to provide her a bedroom and a small sitting area. It was a long shot, but from a financial standpoint, we both knew it was the right thing to do. It became easier after the first week, but it was never the same as it had been. I felt like I was wired on narcotics or coffee. I was so hyper and jittery. I thought I was in heaven when she came up and shared my bed one night, but we were both deluding ourselves. It was just 2 people reaching out for something that was now beyond our reach, and when the bonding stopped, we reverted to who we had been before this nightmare began. Heather was no longer my wife, but it felt like those nights so long ago when she went out with her friends, leaving me to rot. I had no right to feel this way anymore, but I got mad, damn mad, the first time she went out on a date, watching her go and hearing the last brick hit the floor. If Brittany hadn't been such a lovely girl and such a daily reminder of my past, it could have worked. I loved Heather, I probably always would, but I was no longer in love with her. It was just not in me anymore. She cried when I told her that she needed to go because it wasn't working, but at least she didn't beg. The children were upset. I had anticipated that. I considered moving out and buying an apartment, but decided against it since, well, this was my house, at least until it sold. I was no longer the victim. Instead, I was the one in control, and I had to move on. When Nancy told me that I was neither moving forward or backwards, that my baggage was keeping me from achieving my true goals in life, and that she was not going to wait around for me to finally figure it out, she dumped me. I'm not friends with Heather. That's impossible. A friend is someone you can trust, who is honest and acts in your best interest. Heather didn't meet any of those requirements. I have my 2 kids with me and they still have a great relationship with their mother, so in hindsight, I should have taken the house off the market, at least temporarily. Heather's mother died soon after, and her father essentially left her the house when he retired and began touring the nation, or rather, fleeing the memories that haunted him every time he closed his eyes. I try not to ask about her love life or Brittany, it's not rude, but sometimes you have to leave dead dogs lying where they were. Heather still visits my mother, who always tells her to give me a little more time and maybe I'll come around, but that will never happen, at least not in my lifetime. Nevertheless, she continues to hope. Nancy tells me I'm excellent in bed, but sometimes I try too hard, whatever that means, and we occasionally go on dates, but like Heather, it's nothing more than us giving each other a little release. Before I realized that deep down inside of me, I still harbored the great American dream, I was furious, unhappy, and finally numb. My next-door neighbor Ken's cousin, whom I met at a party at his house a few months ago, introduced me to Victoria, a single mother with a little girl who trusted no one, especially men. Our kids were playing together, and David was playing a little too rough for my comfort. Victoria was so different from me that it was scary, but somehow we blended when we were together. "Settle down, boy, before someone gets hurt," I scolded him harshly after he had pushed his sister. "Your son, may I ask?" she inquired. "Yes, but only if he's doing well," was my prompt response. "So he belongs to your wife?" "Not at all. Without a wife, he is still mine." Pam asked me what I thought of her the following week. She was somewhat tall, thin, with long black hair and dark eyes that asked nothing but question, also telling me to keep my distance. That night, she drank nothing stronger than tea and asked me question after question until finally leaving with the group she had arrived with. I said, "She's pretty but a little standoffish," without giving it any thought. A week later, she and her daughter, Karen, returned, and our kids were playing together, so we were pitted against each other once more. She was in charge and I wasn't entirely shocked when she said yes to my advances after the fourth time. It wasn't love at first sight, and there wasn't any lust that evening or for a very long time after that. She wasn't opening up to me, so I went on a casual date with someone else and didn't know where I stood with her. You can guess who found out. The next Saturday, she lost her fury and stormed over to my house, wanting to know why I had cheated on her. "I didn't cheat on you, I just went out on a date." This was the moment when all the pent-up rage that had been suppressed for months finally surfaced. "You're just like my ex-husband and every other man, you can't be trusted." Said that being a cheater was the furthest thing from who I was and that she didn't know anything about me. "I don't know what the hell your husband did to you, but I'm not going to stand here and be accused of something I'm not. I was having a good time. Let me give you a news flash, sweetheart. Life sucks and sometime you get hurt. But that's just part of living because the alternative is death and I'm nowhere ready for that." I was going to give up and head back home since I was hot. Now that we were outside, Ken, Pam, and a few other neighbors were seeing our fight. I choose to go in a different direction. "Well, now that we got that out of the way, do you want to have dinner with me tonight or not?" She was caught off guard by that, and I wasn't sure if I would get a kiss or a slap on the face. We did have dinner that evening and every weekend after, but I didn't get anything. After 2 bottles of wine, yes, she did drink, by the 4th month, I had told her what I wanted and what I wasn't looking for. I didn't mix words and, with a little liquid bravery, she opened out for the first time. Did we get into bed and have a furious, passionate kiss? That was meant for last night. She licked my ear in jest. "But we didn't do anything, did we?" I returned her whisper. "No, and that's the point. She would have left this morning if I had put any pressure on her or done anything else foolish." She saw it as a question of long-term commitment, respect, and trust. I begged and pleaded with her to move in with me after 7 months, but she refused. There's something wrong with the timing. Unfortunate time. I was waiting for her on Friday night when she came into my house with a bunch of groceries. I was sick of waiting and had already dropped to one knee while holding a ring box. She went by me, placed the bags on the counter, then turned around, pulled me to my feet, and planted a kiss on my lips that could have revived the dead. She muttered yes in my ear as we split up and she put the ring on her finger. As her stiff mother tells me whenever she has the chance, she's living in sin with me right now, but we're loving every second of it. The mothers are working quickly to organize a small, private wedding for us. We all attend church together as a family, which is something new for my group, but the most important thing is that we are a family. Victoria was going to move in with just 2 requirements. The first was a new mattress for our bed, and the second was my adoption of Karen after we were married. We must be a true family without any exceptions if we are to be a family. These children will be our offspring, not yours, mine, or, God forbid, stepchildren. I wholeheartedly concurred with her. Heather was informed by our kids, and although she expressed happiness for the 2 of us, I could still see pain in her eyes. Heather declined Victoria's invitation to the wedding, even though I had requested that she attend. No ghosts, according to Victoria, in our new life. She's hot oil, as I've mentioned, and I'm the water that she's been heating up since our first day together. She is the one I've been waiting for, and I adore her to the core of my being. I purchased out Heather's half of the house with a debt against my 401 without telling her. It was crucial to me that this be our home only. Although she wasn't pleased with what I had done, she nevertheless loved and accepted me more as a result. We frequently need makeup sessions because of her fiery temper and the imperfections in our lives. I also thought my toes would never uncurl for long. However, we both realize that this is a long-term relationship and that problems are just that, issues that need to be resolved, rather than being a nail in a coffin, as I once experienced. Am I content? Surprisingly enough, even though I once believed it would never happen to me again. It seems to be true, I suppose. Good things come to those who wait. My comment, an unbelievably sad story. The first couple sounded and acted like petulant children. Some of it was stress, but they were too irresponsible to deal with it jointly.